Hey guys, tonight we step into Anatolia, around the year 500 BCE. The air is cool, the sun just slipping beneath the horizon, and you're standing in a dusty clearing between rows of low mud brick houses. Smoke drifts lazily from hearths, carrying the smell of wood and charred grain. Children scurry barefoot across the packed earth, women call out as they grind wheat on heavy stones, and somewhere a dog barks at shadows that creep just outside the village boundary. The night feels alive, full of voices and smells, but also heavy with mystery, because behind one of those houses, through a doorway draped with woven reeds, something unusual waits, a room not meant for sleeping or eating, but for talking to powers you can't see. It's here, in these earliest farming villages, that you begin to catch whispers of the first gods. Their presence hangs not in temples of stone, but in tiny shrines built into homes, plastered with animal horns, and daubed with painted hands. This is Anatolia at its most experimental moment, people planting barley, herding sheep, and yet still unsure if tomorrow's rains will come, so they hedge their bets with ritual, and you probably wouldn't survive this world for more than a week without joining in. Forget Netflix, the evening's entertainment is watching your neighbor smear bull's blood across a wall niche and call it insurance. Before we dig too deep, if you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and settle in. Tonight's story is all about the shrines and first gods of Anatolia, the beginnings of a religious imagination that shaped the world. Drop your location and your local time down in the comments. Let's see who's listening from the furthest place away, and who's still awake when they really shouldn't be. You stand in a broad plain, the soil dark with ancient fertility, the kind of earth that pulls farmers back year after year. Rivers cut winding paths across the land, swelling with the spring melt, shrinking in dry summers, leaving behind silts that make barley and emmer wheat grow tall. Villages are scattered across this geography, each one a cluster of mud brick houses rising in uneven stacks. Roofs are flat, walls thick, and ladders lead up from courtyards into the interiors. There's not much privacy, but who needs it when survival depends on sharing? Everyone knows everyone else, and yes, that means gossip travels faster than smoke. It's the Neolithic, which means farming has already been around for a while, but it's still precarious. You don't just plant a field and assume food security. You pray the rains arrive, you watch the skies nervously, and you bury charms in the soil just in case. Hunters still roam, bringing in wild boar or deer when they can, but more and more the economy rests on fields, sheep, goats, and cattle. And cattle are more than food. They are muscle, for pulling, leather for clothes, bones for tools, and horns for shrines. A cow is never just a cow here, it's a cosmic mediator, standing somewhere between the field and the gods. In 500 BCE, Anatolia is a land already thick with human history. For thousands of years, people have been farming here, experimenting with architecture, art, and belief. Villages like Çatalhöyük to the south had already risen and shifted, leaving behind layers of ritual plaster and figurines. Now in this later phase of the Neolithic, settlements across central and western Anatolia carry the echo of that legacy but also move in new directions. Shrines are no longer everywhere, instead they appear selectively, tied to certain households or community leaders. Not everyone gets to keep a godroom, but everyone participates in the rituals it holds. You crouch at the edge of a house as villagers gather. They bring bowls of grain, animal bones, sometimes even small figurines shaped from clay. Offerings are placed in hearths that double as altars, flames licking up fragments of food while smoke curls into cracks in the roof. Children peek in, wide-eyed as adults chant words that mean little to outsiders but everything to those inside. Maybe it's a prayer for fertility, maybe a plea for rain, maybe a simple thank you for surviving another season. The shrines themselves don't answer, but their walls, layered with repeated plastering and repainting, seem to hum with continuity. Ritual is repetition after all, a way of convincing yourself that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. From above, the village looks like a patchwork of rooftops, smoke trails, and paths beaten into the earth. But inside, beneath those roofs, the seeds of religion are germinating. Not yet the grand temples of Mesopotamia, not yet the mythic pantheons of later times, but something rawer, closer to the soil. These shrines are experimental spaces where people practice being human in the presence of powers larger than themselves, powers they can't name yet, so they give them shapes: a bull's horn, a painted leopard, a rounded female figurine. Symbols become stand-ins for the divine. And as night deepens in 500 BCE, you sense that something bigger is forming. The village sleeps, dogs curl in the dust, fires burn down to embers, and inside those little shrine rooms, clay figurines sit silently in the dark, their wide eyes fixed forever on the people who placed them there. They don't move, they don't speak, but that embody a truth. Humanity cannot resist filling silence with meaning. That's the beginning of gods. You're still in Anatolia, 500 BCE, but now step back and take in the stage itself, the land, the rivers, the soil, the climate, because none of these early shrines, none of these experiments with gods, appear in a vacuum. They rise out of a geography that both nurtures and torments. The first thing you notice is how varied the terrain is. Wide fertile plains stretch in central Anatolia, broken by volcanic ridges and mountains. Rivers like the Kızılırmak snake through the land, carrying snowmelt and seasonal floods. Rain is fickle, some years generous, some years stingy, and when the rains hold back too long, the ground cracks, crops wilt, and shrines suddenly fill with frantic offerings. It's easy to forget that farming was never a guarantee. Wheat, barley, and lentils only grow if the sky cooperates. Sheep, goats, and cattle thrive if pastures hold green shoots. But Anatolia is a land of sharp contrasts. Winters can be bitter, summers scorch. The people who live here in 500 BCE balance constantly on a tightrope between abundance and hunger, and geography dictates not just survival, but religion. When rivers swell and overflow, you don't just build dikes, you also whisper to the water, treat it as a goddess, appease it with ash and fire. When fields wither in drought, you don't just sigh in frustration, you carry offerings to a shrine, hoping to stir the sympathy of forces beyond your control. Close your eyes, and you hear the sounds of this world, birds calling over reeds, the steady clop of hooves as herds are driven out, the rasp of flint on wood. You smell smoke, damp earth and dung, lots of dung, because animals are as present in villages as people. In fact, the line between wild and domestic is still blurry. Farmers herd goats but also hunt wild aurochs when possible. They gather acorns and wild fruits alongside cultivated wheat. Life is mixed, not neatly divided, and that mix shows up in their shrines too. Offerings of both domestic and wild animals, figurines that blur human and beast, motifs that collapse categories. The environment of Anatolia is not just a backdrop, it's a teacher. Mountains loom, their peaks, snow-covered even in summer, reminders of forces beyond human reach. Caves cut into hillsides, some used for shelter, others for burial. Springs bubble up unexpectedly, clear water flowing where the earth splits open. Each of these features carries weight. A spring is not just water, it's a living presence, a place to leave tokens. A cave is not just a hole, it's a threshold into the underworld. Even stones, large and immovable, acquire significance. Later, some of these will become standing stones, anchors of ritual, but already in 500 BCE, the environment shapes the sacred imagination. Picture a village at the edge of a fertile plain, houses cluster together, walls pressed close, forming a kind of honeycomb. Beyond the last wall, fields stretch outward, divided into strips. Some patches are green with wheat, others lie fallow, dotted with weeds and stubble. The river is half a mile away, its banks lined with reeds and willows. Children chase geese along the edges, men carry jars of water back to the settlement, and overhead, clouds gather, promising rain. You can almost hear the sigh of relief as women glance skyward. Rain isn't just weather here, it's life, and life requires gratitude. When the drops fall heavy, you can be sure someone will scatter grain into a hearth, murmuring thanks to whatever unseen hand tipped the sky's jug. But Anatolia is also unpredictable. Volcanoes mark the landscape, their craters long dormant but their memory alive. Obsidian, volcanic glass, is still collected and chipped into blades, traded across long distances. To hold an obsidian knife is to hold a piece of fire frozen in stone. You imagine villagers passing such tools carefully, their glossy surfaces catching the light. If you're looking for an origin of sacred ore, you don't need thunderbolts, just hold obsidian in your hand and feel its sharpness. It's both practical and magical, both tool and talisman. Geography hands people these materials, and people, being human, assign them meaning. Seasons cycle relentlessly, each one bringing its own tests. Winter, bitter winds sweep across the plateau, animals huddle, fires are stoked all night, food supplies dwindle. Spring, rivers swell, fields sprout green, lambs bleat in corrals, life surges with relief. Summer, heat presses down, waterholes shrink, tempers flare, and shrines once again see renewed use as drought stretches on. Autumn, harvest comes, grain stored in bins, feasts held, offerings made in gratitude. The shrines pulse with this seasonal rhythm. They are not museums of frozen belief, they are instruments, tuned to the environment, struck whenever people feel pressure. And let's not pretend everyone experienced this equally. Some villages sat on richer soils, others on thin stony ground. Some had easy river access, others had to haul water painfully far. Inequalities begin here, in geography. Families in fertile plots produce surplus, share more generously in feasts, maybe even maintain more elaborate shrines. Those on poorer soil scrape by, leaning more heavily on hunting and trade. Religion mirrors this. The gods of abundance smile more often in rich villages, while in the leaner ones, gods are begged, coaxed, even threatened with rituals of desperation. Now imagine moving through this landscape at dawn. The sky is pale blue, the air chilly. You walk along a dirt track, past fields of young wheat. Birds scatter from the stubble. Ahead rises a low ridge, dotted with junipers. On the ridge's far side another village smokes faintly in the early light. You hear dogs barking, women singing as they grind grain. Beyond, mountains rise hazy in the distance. This is Anatolia, a patchwork of plains, rivers, ridges and distant highlands, stitched together by footpaths and the occasional track of traders. It's vast, but also intimate. And still, amid all this, there's humor. Imagine farmers muttering when a goat eats their young barley shoots. The gods better be laughing, because I'm not. Step back now and see Anatolia as a mosaic of such villages, each with its shrines, each with its environmental anxieties, each experimenting with symbols. The land itself shapes every gesture. So when you think of these early Anatolian shrines, don't picture isolated religious eccentricities. Picture them as mirrors of geography. Without the rivers, no water goddess. Without the mountains, no high god. Without the aurochs roaming the plains, no horned altars. The environment is not just background, it is co-author of religion, and you, standing barefoot in the dust of 500 BCE, are constantly reminded that every sunrise, every storm, every crack in the soil, is a message. Whether you survive depends on how well you read it. And that, of course, is why shrines stand where they do, as translations of landscape into meaning, as contracts between people and place. A cracked riverbed is terrifying, but less so if you believe a clay figurine might nudge the sky into compassion. A mountain is immense, but more bearable if you imagine it shelters a powerful protector. And obsidian, sharp as fire, is no longer just dangerous if you see it as a divine gift. In 5500 BCE, Anatolia geography and environment aren't just challenges, they are sacred teachers, demanding constant negotiation, and shrines are the notebooks where villagers jot down their answers. You set the stage with soil and seasons, but now you step closer into the pattern of life itself. Villages in 500 BCE Anatolia are not sprawling cities yet, they are clusters, tight-knit, intimate, each one a human experiment in permanence. People no longer wander with the seasons, they tether themselves to a place, building mud brick walls, patching roofs, digging storage pits, and marking out paths that will outlast them. Settlement patterns shape everything, how shrines are built, how rituals are performed, and even how gossip ricochets across rooftops. A village begins as a handful of houses, maybe extended families, choosing to live near one another for safety and for easier sharing of labor. Mud bricks, dried in the sun, stack into walls. Roofs are flat, supported by timber and reeds plastered with mud. Ladders climb from courtyards up onto the rooftops. And yes, rooftops are the streets. You move from house to house by walking across them, greeting neighbors as you go, pretending not to notice that one house still hasn't fixed its leaking plaster. Privacy, forget it. When a baby cries in one corner, the entire settlement knows. When smoke rises from a hearth, everyone smells what you're cooking. And this intimacy means that shrines are woven right into domestic life. They aren't set apart on hills with grand staircases, not yet. Instead, they're tucked into houses or attached to clusters of rooms. A visitor can walk into a settlement and have no idea which room is a shrine until they step inside and see bull's horns embedded in plaster or walls painted with red ochre hands. That blur between sacred and domestic defines the Neolithic. Your house is for eating, sleeping, arguing, storing grain, and sometimes communing with powers beyond. Imagine finishing your porridge and then sliding over to make an offering at the wall niche. Sacred and ordinary are not separate categories, they coexist in the same square of floor. The layout of villages reflects both practical needs and social networks. Houses press close together, sharing walls to conserve materials, courtyards open between clusters, spaces for grinding grain, repairing tools, or airing out laundry. Pathways snake irregularly, but there's an organic logic. Every path eventually leads to a communal well, a threshing floor, or the edge of the fields. And beneath floors, burials lie, the dead literally part of the foundation. People live atop their ancestors, sometimes digging through old graves to add new ones. The line between past and present, between living and dead, is paper thin, and shrines often double as the bridge between them. Stand in one such courtyard, women kneel at grinding stones, rhythmic motions turning grain into flour, a boy chases chickens, his bare feet scuffing dust, men repair a corral, shouting over a stubborn calf. Smoke from hearths drifts upward. Above, neighbors move along rooftops, balancing baskets of grain, calling greetings. Then, from a doorway, someone emerges carrying a small clay figurine, a woman with wide hips, seated, hands resting on her knees. The crowd shifts, making space. Settlement life also means negotiation. Families share walls, courtyards, storage spaces. Conflict is inevitable. Who gets water first? Whose sheep trampled? Whose barley? Shrines play a role here too. Ritual spaces are neutral ground, places where disputes can be softened by shared prayer, where offerings smooth tensions. You might grumble about your neighbor's noisy goat, but when both of you are kneeling before a bullhorn altar you mutter the same chants. Nothing like divine surveillance to keep people civil, or at least quieter about their grudges. The architecture of shrines reflects this communal function. Some are small, barely larger than storage rooms, decorated with plaster reliefs of animals. Others are more elaborate, with multiple layers of repainting, niches for figurines, and carefully curated deposits of bones and ash. But what unites them is placement. They aren't monumental, looming above the village. They're embedded in its fabric, part of its heartbeat. Walk through a cluster of houses, and you'll pass ordinary rooms where children sleep and sheep sometimes wander in, and then suddenly you're in a space thick with symbols. The transition is subtle but powerful. One step and you're in the presence of the gods.
If you could fly over one of these villages, you'd see a pattern like honeycomb cells, each mud brick unit tight against the next. Flat roofs form a patchwork, dotted with drying herbs, clay vessels, or occasionally a cat stretched out in the sun, because apparently cats have been claiming rooftops forever. From above, nothing marks a shrine. Sacredness is invisible until you step inside, and that invisibility tells you something. In 500 BCE Anatolia, religion isn't a spectacle for outsiders, it's inward, household-based, integrated. If you want to find the divine, you don't look to a skyline, you knock on a neighbor's door.
Settlement patterns also reveal the beginnings of hierarchy. Some houses are larger, with thicker walls, more storage bins, more elaborate shrines. Others are smaller, cramped, barely enough space for a family. It doesn't take much imagination to see how this inequality feeds into ritual authority. Families with resources host more elaborate ceremonies, store more offerings, and gain prestige. Over time, shrine maintenance becomes a marker of influence. When people walk past your house and see bull's horns gleaming from plastered walls, they know your household carries weight, both earthly and divine. Religion and status entwine like vines, already in these early mud brick settlements. The constant rebuilding of houses adds another layer. Mud brick melts with rain, walls collapse, floors crack, so houses are repaired, rebuilt, layered upon one another. Archaeologists later dig through these layers like cake slices, each one holding traces of generations. Shrines, too, are rebuilt, plastered over again and again, each layer preserving faint traces of the last. It's like a palimpsest, a sacred diary, written in plaster and horn. For the villagers, it means continuity. Even if a house crumbles, even if a shrine wall cracks, rebuilding reaffirms the connection. Every fresh plastering is both repair and ritual. And yet, daily life hums with contradictions. On the one hand, shrines promise stability, a sense that the gods, or the ancestors, are close, watching, maybe even guiding. On the other hand, shrines remind you of fragility. Why keep plastering bull skulls unless you fear the crops will fail? Why repaint leopards on walls unless you worry predators lurk too close? Every ritual is an admission of anxiety. Settlements may look sturdy, but under the surface, insecurity gnaws. Of course, not all anxiety stays solemn. People joke about it. Imagine a farmer muttering when a ritual doesn't bring rain. Maybe the goddess fell asleep, or a child imitating chants in a silly voice. making adults chuckle before shushing him. Humor coexists with devotion, because human beings can't help but laugh at their own desperation, and in truth, laughter strengthens the community just as much as ritual does. By evening the village glows with firelight, shadows flicker across walls, voices rise in conversation, sheep bleat in corrals. Somewhere in the cluster, a shrine room glows more brightly than the rest. Inside, horns gleam red in the firelight, figurines cast long shadows and offerings smolder. Outside, life continues, children curl into sleep, dogs patrol the edges, adults share grain beer, the sacred and the ordinary fold together seamlessly, like threads in one cloth, and in this cloth, the pattern of village settlement is not just survival. Step back again, and you see the significance. Without villages, there are no shrines. Without clustered houses, there is no need for communal ritual to bind people. The architecture of settlement is the architecture of religion, and in 5500 BCE Anatolia, every mud brick wall, every courtyard, every rooftop path is a stage for this experiment in permanence, an experiment that makes shrines possible, gods imaginable, and community both fragile and resilient. Step with me now inside one of those rooms that marks itself off, not by size but by atmosphere. Ordinary houses of 5500 BCE, Anatolia smell of smoke, porridge, and sheep dung. A shrine smells different, the air is heavy with ash and plaster dust. The walls, instead of showing the usual streaks of soot, gleam with freshly smoothed layers of mud mixed with lime and painted in red ochre. Niches are carved into the walls, their edges rounded, sometimes decorated with molded reliefs of animals. Against one wall a pair of horns, massive, curving aurochs horns are embedded in plaster, staring out at anyone who enters. This is the architecture of the early shrine, not monumental in scale, not imposing from the outside, but unmistakably set apart once you cross the threshold. You don't mistake this for a kitchen or a sleeping room. The horns, the niches, the reliefs, the painted walls, all announce, this is a space where ordinary rules bend. Here, offerings are made, symbols repeated, and the line between human and divine blurred. The choice of material matters. Mud brick is the basic building block, shaped from river mud and straw, baked under the sun, easy to make, easy to repair, but also impermanent. Shrines inherit this quality. They are built, used, collapse, rebuilt, replastered, repainted. Layer upon layer accumulates. If you chip away the plaster of a shrine wall, you might find 10, 20, 30 layers of paint beneath, each one a ghost of earlier rituals. It's as if the wall itself remembers, storing centuries of devotion in its fabric. People in 500 BCE may not have had libraries, but they had plaster. Every layer is a page in the book of their gods. Niches are especially important. Cut into walls, sometimes framed by painted lines, they house figurines or offerings. You can picture villagers placing a clay goddess figurine in a niche, surrounding her with beads, bones, or painted stones. Niches concentrate attention. They're small enough to make a figurine seem important, large enough to suggest depth, a miniature doorway into another world. The symbolism is simple but powerful. The niche is where the unseen becomes visible, where the divine peers back into the room. Other shrines use relief sculpture. Leopards stride across plaster, their bodies outlined in clay, painted in bright pigments. Bulls appear, horns raised, muscles exaggerated. These animals aren't decorative, they are chosen. The leopard is a predator, sleek and powerful, feared but admired. The bull is strength, fertility, and danger all at once. To mold them onto walls is to bring their qualities into the room, to harness their essence for ritual. The hearth is another constant. Fire in the shrine burns not only for cooking but for offering. Bones, seeds, fragments of food are tossed into flames, their smoke carrying intentions upward. Ash accumulates in thick layers, sometimes swept aside, sometimes deliberately buried under new plaster. Fire connects the room to cycles of transformation, wood to ash, grain to smoke, life to death. When you sit in a shrine and hear the crackle of flames, you hear more than firewood. You hear a bridge being built between human effort and unseen forces. The placement of shrines within villages reveals their role. Some are tucked inside ordinary houses, perhaps marking certain families as custodians of ritual. Others seem more communal, accessible from shared courtyards. In both cases, shrines are not monumentalized. You don't see a ziggurat towering above rooftops, as you will thousands of years later in Mesopotamia. Instead, sacredness is folded inward, hidden until you step inside. That intimacy changes the mood. Rituals here aren't performed for distant crowds, they are for neighbors, family, kin, everyone packed into a small room, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same smoke, staring at the same horns. The gods are not far away, they're pressed into the plaster 2 feet from your face. One fascinating feature is the deliberate deposition of animal remains. Horns, skulls, jaws, often arranged carefully into walls or floors. Bulls dominate, but rams, deer and even leopards appear. Sometimes skulls are plastered over, giving them smooth surfaces, as if transformed from bone into permanent symbol. Think about the effort involved. Hunting a massive aurochs, dragging its head back, plastering its horns into a wall. That isn't casual, it's theater, display and devotion all in one. And when neighbors step into the shrine, those horns remind them of both the danger outside and the power now inside. Paint also plays a central role. Red ochre, ground from iron-rich rock, is smeared across walls, niches, sometimes figurines. Its color is unmistakable, blood-like, earthy, vibrant. In a shrine, red is never neutral. It suggests life, death, fertility, danger, and power. Traces of black, yellow and white pigments also appear, but red dominates. Imagine standing in a dim room, lit by a single flame, the walls flickering red around you. Every movement of light turns the paint into pulse. You don't need elaborate myths. The sensory effect alone convinces you that something otherworldly is present. And it's not just visual. Shrines are designed to overwhelm multiple senses. The smell of burning offerings, the heat of fire, the coolness of plaster walls, the echo of chants in a small space. Together they produce altered states of mind. This is architecture, not for comfort, but for effect. You don't walk out of a shrine unchanged, even if the gods never speak. Your body remembers the smoke in your lungs, the horns in your vision, the heat on your skin. There's also evidence that shrines were renewed seasonally. Floors are replastered at intervals, walls repainted, figurines reburied and replaced. Renewal ties ritual to agricultural cycles. When fields are sown, shrines are replastered. When harvest comes, shrines receive offerings. The architecture isn't static, it's cyclical, pulsing in rhythm with seasons. The room itself becomes a calendar, each new layer of plaster marking another round of planting and reaping. But here's the thing, shrines aren't perfect. They crumble, collapse, fill with debris. Sometimes they're abandoned and new ones built. Sacredness doesn't mean indestructibility, it means persistence. Even when one shrine fails, another rises, and villagers probably joked about this. Picture someone grumbling while hauling buckets of mud to replaster. If the gods wanted smoother walls, maybe they should send less rain. Sarcasm, yes, but also devotion. Complaining while obeying is one of humanity's oldest religious traditions. What these shrines reveal most of all is experimentation. There is no single blueprint yet, no universal temple form. Each village tries its own mix. Horns here, leopards there, niches in one, figurines in another. Some ideas spread, others vanish. Shrines are laboratories of the sacred, testing how best to anchor invisible forces in mud brick walls. And because villages are so intimate, every experiment matters. If one family adds a new figurine and the crops grow well, you can bet the neighbors will copy it next season. Innovation is contagious, especially when survival is at stake. Stand in such a room one last time. The fire crackles low, horns glint faintly, red paint pulses on the wall. You sit cross-legged, pressed between neighbors, sweat dripping from the heat. The ritual leader mutters words you half understand. Ashes swirl in the air, and you feel a tingle down your spine. Is it the gods, the smoke, the claustrophobia? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you believe, or at least you act as if you do. That is the secret power of early shrine architecture. It doesn't need to prove the gods. It only needs to convince the community, and on that front, it succeeds brilliantly. You've stepped into the rooms, felt the heat of the fire, seen the horns glaring from plastered walls. Now your eyes are drawn not to the architecture itself, but to the symbols covering it, the imagery that villagers of 5500 BCE Anatolia chose to surround themselves with. Because these shrines are not blank rooms, they are saturated with meaning, a visual language that speaks even when no one utters a word. Sometimes horns are arranged in pairs, symmetrical and confronting. Sometimes entire skulls are plastered into walls, their eye sockets smoothed over, their horns protruding like eternal guardians. Imagine kneeling in such a room, firelight flickering across rows of horns. The message is unmistakable. This is not just your living room anymore. This is a place where the bull's strength lives on, watching you, reminding you that survival depends on taming and honoring such forces. Alongside bulls, leopards stalk the walls. Plaster reliefs depict them in motion, their bodies stretched sleekly across the surface, tails curling, mouths open. Leopards were apex predators of the Anatolian landscape, rare, dangerous, and admired. They embodied stealth and ferocity. Why paint them on shrine walls? Perhaps as protectors, warding off evil, perhaps as reminders that the wild cannot be fully tamed, or perhaps simply because they were awe-inspiring, and awe is the raw material of religion. To sit under a painted leopard is to borrow some of its power. Geometric motifs also appear: chevrons, zigzags, spirals, handprints. At first glance they may seem random, but repetition suggests intention. Zigzags may echo water, flowing rivers, or snakes. Spirals might symbolize cycles of seasons, life, or rebirth. Handprints, smeared in red ochre, are human claims on sacred space. They say, "I was here, I touched this wall, I left part of myself in this room." In shrines without writing, symbols are the script. Every painted zigzag is a sentence, every horn a paragraph, every figurine a chapter in the unwritten book of belief. The female figurine is another recurring symbol, and though we'll linger on her in detail later, she belongs here too among shrine imagery. Rounded hips, swollen bellies, seated postures, fertility incarnate. Some are small, portable, made to be held. Others are larger, fixed in niches. Wherever they appear, they radiate themes of abundance, reproduction, and continuity. Place one beside bull's horns, and you have a complete picture. Fertility of animals, fertility of women, fertility of fields. It's a shrine as a contract with life itself. Color is crucial. Red ochre dominates, its blood-like vibrancy cutting through dim firelight. Black is used sparingly, often to outline eyes or animals. White plaster provides a bright backdrop, glowing in lamplight. Sometimes yellow appears, perhaps from clay pigments. Together these colors create a palette that is visceral and immediate. You don't need literacy to feel what red paint means when it surrounds a bull's skull. It means vitality, blood, sacrifice, power. Bones and objects also serve as symbols: jawbones of animals placed under floors, beads scattered in hearths, shells carried far inland. Each is more than material, each is meaning. A jawbone might represent the voice of the animal, buried so it still speaks. A shell from the coast, hundreds of miles away, signals connection, travel, and rarity, transformed into sacred treasure. Shrines are thus cabinets of curiosities, filled with objects turned into symbols by placement and repetition. And yet, don't imagine these symbols as static solemn icons. They lived, they were touched, handled, repainted, replaced. A figurine might be carried in a procession, then set back into its niche. A wall painting might be repainted season after season, layers building up like echoes. Horns might be replastered to keep them bright. Sacredness was maintained through action, not passivity. A shrine symbol that wasn't used would eventually fade, crumble, disappear. Meaning lived in the upkeep, the care, the rituals that kept these images alive. So what did villagers see when they entered a shrine? They saw a world transformed into symbols: the bull as raw force, the leopard as predator, the woman as life-giver, the zigzag as water, the spiral as cycle, the handprint as human presence. They saw their environment, their fears, their hopes, all compressed into one small room. And the genius of it is this: by crowding these symbols together, by surrounding themselves with them, they created an atmosphere where invisible powers felt present. Step inside, and you weren't just in a mud brick room, you were in a map of reality itself. Modern people might scoff, but think of your own symbols: crosses, crescents, stars, flags, even brand logos. They all carry meanings beyond their shapes. They remind you of identity, promise, obligation. Shrines of 5500 BCE did the same. Bulls weren't just bulls, they were power and sustenance. Leopards weren't just cats, they were ferocity and guardianship. Spirals weren't doodles, they were eternity. You live in symbols too, you just happen to call them something else. Symbols also bound communities together. Everyone in the village understood what horns meant, what a painted hand meant, what a clay goddess meant. You didn't need long sermons. You saw, you knew. Shrines spoke a common language, silent but shared, and because symbols were repeated across villages, they also linked communities. Travelers arriving in a new settlement might see familiar horns on a wall, and instantly recognized the sacred language. In that moment, strangers became kin. Humor had a place here as well. You can imagine a farmer teasing a neighbor, "Your bull horns look a little small, maybe the gods won't hear you," or children smearing their own handprints playfully on a wall, giggling while adults pretend to scold. Symbolism wasn't always solemn, it was lived, joked about, argued over, passed down. In that sense, shrines were not mausoleums of meaning, they were playgrounds of it. But beneath the jokes lay urgency. Why keep repeating symbols unless you feared the world might collapse without them? The aurochs might vanish, the river might dry, fertility might fail. Symbols in shrines are not luxuries, they are insurance policies. They say, we did our part, we painted, plastered, placed, and prayed. If the gods don't answer, it's not our fault. In other words, symbols held anxiety at bay. Take one last look at a shrine wall in 550 BCE. The firelight flickers, red paint pulses, horns loom, a leopard prowls across plaster. Your eyes trace zigzags, spirals, handprints. You realize you are surrounded not just by symbols but by the entire worldview of the community, pressed into mud and pigment. Every fear, every hope, every gratitude, every plea is here, coded into imagery, and as you step back outside, into the cool night air, you understand, shrines are not just architecture, they are the first art galleries, the first textbooks, the first mirrors of human imagination. You've seen the horns on the walls, the leopards prowling across plaster, the red ochre handprints glowing in firelight. But now, bend lower, look beneath your feet, because what lies under the house floors of Anatolia in 550 BCE is just as important as what decorates the walls. The dead are here, not in graveyards outside the settlement, not in separate cemeteries, but right under the floors where the living sleep, eat, and argue about whose goat wandered where. Burials beneath houses are one of the defining features of this time, and they tell you a great deal about how early people imagined continuity, ancestry, and the thin line between the sacred and the ordinary. Picture a typical house: mud brick walls, a flat roof, a hearth in the corner, sleeping mats along the wall. At night, children curl up together, adults lie nearby, embers glow faintly in the hearth. Beneath the plastered floor, just inches down, lies a grandmother, wrapped in cloth, knees drawn tight to chest, as if sleeping. In the next room, under another layer of floor, a child rests, and under yet another plaster layer, bones of long-forgotten kin. To live here is to live literally on top of your ancestors. Every step you take is a reminder that the past is not gone, it's directly below you, woven into your house, into your family, into the very structure of your daily life. The practice wasn't random. Graves were carefully dug, bodies carefully placed. Many were in crouched positions, as though sleeping. Some were accompanied by beads, figurines, or tools. In some houses, adults and children were buried together, suggesting family groups. Over time, floors were replastered, sealing the dead beneath layers of smooth surface. The house became both dwelling and tomb, and the shrine was the hinge that made sense of it all, the place where you remembered, honored, and kept alive the presence under your feet. Think about the psychology of this. You don't walk out to a distant cemetery to mourn, you cook bread over the same spot where your grandfather rests. You argue with your spouse 2 feet above an ancestor. You laugh, cry, give birth, grind grain, all on top of bones. Death isn't separate, it's stitched into everyday life. Children grow up knowing they sleep above generations, and when they themselves die, they too will be folded into the floor joining the chorus below. That intimacy with the dead shapes how you think of gods. If the ancestors are right beneath you, perhaps the gods are only a little further down. The earth itself becomes layered with presence. Some burials show signs of disturbance, bones rearranged, skulls removed. At first glance this might look like disrespect, but it's more likely ritual. Skulls may have been exhumed, decorated, kept as relics, then reburied. To us that sounds eerie. To them, it was reverence. The head, after all, holds identity. To lift it out and paint it, to display it in a shrine, was to let an ancestor remain visibly part of the living. Imagine walking into a shrine and seeing plastered bull horns on one wall, a leopard painted on another, and between them, a human skull coated in plaster, features reshaped, eyes painted. That's not a room you forget. It's family, wild power, and the divine, all staring back at you. The closeness of the dead meant continuity. You could never say, "We're starting fresh." Every action was witnessed by those beneath. Shrines reinforced this. Ancestors were not distant figures in hazy myths. They were immediate presences. If a harvest failed, you might blame not only the gods but also an ancestor displeased at being neglected. If a child thrived, you might thank both the figurine in the niche and the grandmother beneath the floor. Religion in 5500 BCE Anatolia was not only about distant powers, it was about family. Shrines and burials created a loop, the living caring for the dead empowering the living. Let's walk through a burial ritual. A family member dies, perhaps in childbirth, perhaps of illness, perhaps simply from age. The body is washed, rubbed with ochre, wrapped in a mat or cloth. Relatives gather, chants are spoken, perhaps food is offered to the corpse. Then a shallow pit is dug in the floor of the house. The body is placed inside, knees tucked, arms folded. A few beads or a figurine might be tucked beside. The pit is filled, plastered over, smoothed, until invisible. Life resumes. Children run across the spot. Dogs curl up nearby. Daily chores continue. But everyone remembers, that corner of the house is not like other corners. It has weight. It has presence. Over generations, the floor becomes layered with plaster and burials. Archaeologists later dig down and find sequences. One burial, replaster. Another burial, replaster. Like a layered cake of life and death. Each new floor is both architectural maintenance and ritual remembrance. To plaster a floor is to honor the dead beneath, to seal them in and mark continuity. Houses become family tombs, and shrines become the places where that tomb is interpreted. There's a practical element too. By burying beneath floors, villages avoid the dangers of open graves attracting animals. But practical doesn't erase symbolic. The act of sleeping above your grandmother's bones is not just convenience. It shapes your worldview. It tells you death is not separation, it's inclusion, and inclusion leads to the first inklings of divine order. If ancestors remain part of the household, maybe gods are ancestors stretched to cosmic scale. Maybe the first gods were simply great-grandparents multiplied, abstracted, expanded until they covered rivers, mountains, and storms. It's not hard to imagine humor, even here. Someone might joke, when food runs short, better not eat too loudly, or the ones under the floor will be jealous. Or when a child acts out, you know your grandfather's right below you watching. That mix of jest and belief keeps the relationship alive. Religion thrives not only on solemnity but on banter, repetition, reminders slipped into daily chatter. Now expand the view. Across Anatolia, thousands of houses, thousands of floors, thousands of burials, an entire landscape where the living and the dead are interwoven. Shrines are not isolated spaces of occasional ritual. They're part of a cultural fabric that assumes ancestors are always near. This practice also ties people to place. If your ancestors are buried under your floor, you're not moving easily. Your house is your lineage. To leave would mean abandoning them. Shrines then are anchors, not only of ritual, but of settlement. They hold families to soil. They make villages stable. Still, the essence remains. Shrines and burials beneath floors bind the community. They tell people they are not individuals adrift, but parts of a chain. Every child born is another link, every burial another layer. Shrines give that chain meaning. Without them, bones would just lie in the earth. With shrines, bones become ancestors, ancestors become presences, presences become proto-gods. So next time you picture Neolithic Anatolia, don't only imagine horns on walls or leopards painted in ochre. Imagine the quiet beneath your feet, the grandmother sleeping under plaster, the child wrapped in cloth just inches below. Imagine lying down at night, staring at the ceiling, and knowing that as you dream, generations dream below you. Imagine kneeling at a shrine, bull's horns gleaming above, fire crackling, while the bones of your lineage lie beneath. That's the depth of continuity. That's how shrines stitch together life, death, and divinity. The horns, the leopards, the handprints, all of these prepare you for what may be the most enduring and recognizable symbol of Neolithic Anatolia, the female figurine. She sits cross-legged, hips broad, breasts full, belly rounded. Sometimes she holds her knees, sometimes she rests on a throne flanked by cats or lions. Sometimes she is tiny enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Sometimes she is larger, commanding her own niche in a shrine. Archaeologists find her again and again, in houses, in storage bins, in refuse pits, and most importantly in shrines. She is not one woman, but an idea, the idea of fertility, abundance, continuity, and perhaps the very first goddess. Step into a shrine and see her placed beneath bull's horns. The juxtaposition is deliberate. The bull embodies raw masculine force, muscle, danger, The seated female embodies creation, reproduction, nurture. Together they express a balance, the dual energies upon which village life depends. Fields need bulls to plow, but they also need seeds, rain and soil to swell with life. Families need men to hunt or herd, but they also need women to bear children, feed them and sustain households. To plaster horns and place figurines in the same room is to state a truth that everyone in 500 BCE already knows. Survival is a partnership of forces, not a solo act. The figurines themselves vary. Some are abstract, simple clay lumps with exaggerated hips and breasts. Others are carefully modeled, showing seated posture, arms, even jewelry. Many are painted red, echoing the ochre used in rituals and burials. A few are burnished to a shine. The sheer repetition across centuries and villages suggests that they mattered deeply. These were not idle toys. They were handled, revered, placed, broken, buried, remade. In fact, their fragility may have been part of the point. Clay breaks easily, and when it does, you make another. Fertility too is fragile. Each birth is a risk, each crop uncertain. Figurines embody that tension. They are powerful, but also breakable. Some figurines are clearly linked to women's lives. They show pregnancy, swollen bellies, hands placed protectively. Others show birth itself, legs spread, child emerging. Imagine the power of holding such a figurine during labor, pressing clay against sweaty palms, praying that the same creative force embodied in the figure would carry mother and child safely through. Childbirth in 550–500 BCE was dangerous. Many women died. Many infants died. A figurine was not just a symbol, it was a lifeline, a focus for desperate hope. But female figurines go beyond reproduction. Many emphasize abundance. They are hefty, wide, sometimes almost comically large in belly and thigh. These aren't skinny models, they are overflowing. That fullness symbolizes harvest as much as pregnancy. A round belly might be read as a swelling grain bin, breasts as overflowing milk, hips as fertile soil. In this sense, the figurines are not only about individual women but about the land itself. Anatolia's soil, rivers and seasons are imagined in female form, capable of both feeding and withholding. Place such a figurine in a shrine, and you are negotiating not only with your own household's fertility, but with the fertility of the world. The famous seated woman of Çatalhöyük, though slightly earlier than 500 BCE, captures this essence. She sits on a throne, flanked by two felines, perhaps leopards. She is powerful, commanding, her body abundant. To later eyes she looks like a goddess. To her makers she was probably a convergence, woman, mother, earth, power. And although shrines of 500 BCE Anatolia are smaller and more localized, the same themes resonate. The clay female figure is the embodiment of creation, the closest thing villagers had to divinity incarnate. Now imagine a ritual. A family brings grain, sets it in a bowl before a figurine in a shrine niche. A woman touches the figurine's belly, asking silently for her own belly to swell. A man places a sheep bone beside her, linking livestock fertility to human fertility. Children are shooed away, but they peek from the doorway wide-eyed, seeing the small clay figure glow in firelight. The air thickens with smoke, chants murmur, and for a moment, the figurine is not clay. She is presence, possibility, hope. And what happens when the figurine breaks? Because clay breaks often, in many shrines, fragments are found, torsos without heads, legs without torsos, arms scattered. Sometimes they are carefully buried in pits, sometimes they are tossed into middens with ash and bones, but even broken they retain meaning. A torso fragment might still be kept, handled, placed in a corner. The act of breaking may even have been deliberate, a symbolic release, a way of sending the figure's power back into the soil. In this sense, figurines live short but potent lives. They are made, used, broken, and replaced, cycling like seasons. It's tempting to see all this as proof of a single mother goddess religion, and perhaps something like that existed, but caution is wise. Female figurines could mean many things at once: mothers praying for safe childbirth, farmers hoping for abundant harvests, communities seeking continuity, potters experimenting with clay, children playing before rituals. The power of the figurines is precisely their flexibility. They are open enough to hold multiple meanings, strong enough to persist across centuries, fragile enough to be remade endlessly. That balance is why they endure. Notice also how figurines connect shrines to households. Shrines may host large bull horns and painted leopards, but figurines often travel, A woman can keep one in her home, bury one with her child, or bring one to a communal ceremony. They personalize the sacred. You can't carry a plastered bull skull around, but you can carry a figurine. Shrines thus become both public and private. They host communal symbols and intimate tokens, binding both together. Humor again creeps in. You can almost hear someone muttering during a bad harvest, maybe she needs to lose some weight before she helps us, or a child shaping a crude figurine in imitation of adults, only to be scolded. That's not a toy, put it back. Religious imagery always balances between reverence and parody, and 550–500 BCE was no different. If anything, the ability to joke kept the symbols alive. From a wider perspective, the female figurine represents a profound human leap. It takes the messy, terrifying, hopeful realities of birth, harvest, and survival, and turns them into an object you can touch, carry, repaint, replace. That transformation is the beginning of theology. Gods begin as clay, later they will be marble statues, golden idols, painted icons, towering temples, but in Anatolia, 500 BCE they begin as lumps of clay shaped into female form, small enough to hold, powerful enough to matter, fragile enough to break, enduring enough to shape millennia. So the next time you picture early Anatolian shrines, don't stop at horns and leopards. Look closer, see the small seated figure, belly full, hips wide, painted red, eyes staring blankly but meaning everything. She is mother and soil, womb and bin, woman and earth. She is clay, and yet she is more. She is the first attempt to give form to the gods. Now that you've met the seated woman of clay, it's time to glance around the shrine and notice who else is watching you, because the walls, floors and deposits of 5500 BCE Anatolia are alive with creatures, bulls, rams, leopards, boars, vultures, snakes, animals, real and imagined, crowd into sacred space, not as background scenery but as central participants. If female figurines channel fertility, animals embody the untamed powers of the world, the companions and adversaries on which survival depends. Start with cattle. We've already seen horns plastered into walls, sometimes whole skulls embedded, glaring forever, but there's more to it. Cattle in Anatolia are more than food. They are wealth, prestige and brute strength. A family with cattle has milk, meat, leather, traction for fields. A family without cattle has envy. So when shrines exalt bulls, they are exalting prosperity itself. Each horn is a trophy, proof of danger overcome and resources secured. Imagine the drama of dragging a massive aurochs skull into a house, plastering it into the wall, repainting it with red ochre. That's not just ritual, it's social bragging, the Neolithic equivalent of parking your sports car in the driveway, except this driveway smells like smoke and goat dung. Next come rams and goats. Smaller than cattle, but equally important, goats provide milk, meat, skins. Their horns, spiraled and sharp, appear in shrines too. Where bulls embody raw force, rams embody stubbornness and persistence. Herds wander, graze and multiply. The goat is the steady hum of survival, the daily companion of farmers. To place goat horns in shrines is to honor reliability, the unglamorous fertility that keeps families alive. Picture children herding goats out of a village, sticks in hand, dogs yapping, then picture those same horns repurposed as offerings in a shrine, as if to thank the animals for their cooperation, and perhaps to apologize for turning them into dinner. Leopards are different, rare, dangerous, almost mythic. They stalk shrines in painted reliefs and molded sculptures. Why leopards? Because they are the perfect predator, silent, sleek, deadly. To humans they inspire awe and fear. To mold them into walls is to bring that power under control, or at least to pretend to. Imagine villagers crammed into a shrine, firelight flickering across two plaster leopards prowling above. Their eyes glow red in the smoke. Do you feel safer with them on your side, or more terrified they'll leap from the wall? That's the point. Religion thrives in tension, the uneasy mix of fear and comfort. Boars also leave their mark. Tusks appear in deposits, bones scattered in shrines. Wild boars are fierce, rooting up fields, charging hunters. They embody chaos, the disruption of carefully sown crops, the challenge of the hunt. To bring their remains into shrines is to domesticate that chaos, to frame it within ritual. Perhaps a boar tusk laid beside a figurine is a reminder, even the most destructive forces can be harnessed if acknowledged. Or maybe it's just a boast. I killed this beast and lived to plaster the tusk on the wall. Either way, boars are present, unruly guests in sacred rooms. Birds swoop in too, especially vultures. At earlier Anatolian sites like Çatalhöyük, wall paintings show vultures hovering over headless human bodies. By 500 BCE, echoes of this imagery linger. Vultures are scavengers, cleaners of the dead. They symbolize death's cycle, the transition from flesh to bone. To place vulture imagery in a shrine is to acknowledge mortality, but also transformation. Humans die, vultures strip them, bones endure, ancestors remain. It's unsettling, yes, but also oddly reassuring. Death is not the end, it is a process, and vultures are part of it. Snakes slither through symbolism as well. Their zigzag patterns appear on walls, their coiled forms on figurines. Snakes shed skin, vanish into holes, reappear as if reborn. They embody cycles, hidden dangers, and renewal. Farmers both fear and respect them. A snake in your house is threat and omen. A snake in your shrine is a guardian of thresholds, a reminder that unseen forces coil just beneath the surface. Place a clay snake beside a female figurine, and you weave fertility with regeneration. Place it beside bull horns, and you marry strength with secrecy. Either way, snakes matter. The presence of animals in shrines reflects the environment beyond. Walk outside a village at dawn, bulls graze on the plain, goats bleat from corrals, dogs bark, birds wheel overhead, snakes rustle through weeds. This landscape is not empty, it hums with life, danger, sustenance. Shrines compress that hum into symbols. Each animal is not just itself but an ambassador of a force. Bulls represent power and wealth, goats, steady fertility, leopards predatory danger, vultures, death's cycle, snakes renewal. Together they form a bestiary of belief, an early pantheon, not of human gods but of animal powers. And yet animals are not only revered, they are consumed, sacrificed, offered. Bones found in shrines show evidence of burning, breaking, deposition. Ritual meals leave behind fragments. An animal's body feeds both humans and gods. The act of killing, eating and offering collapses categories. Animal into food, food into offering, offering into communication. Imagine roasting goat meat over a shrine fire, villagers feasting, then tossing bones into flames, letting smoke carry thanks upward. It's barbecue and mass at once, half laughter, half reverence. The combination of female figurines and animal remains is particularly telling. Place a rounded goddess figure in a niche, surround her with bull horns, goat bones, boar tusks, and bird feathers. The result is not chaos but cosmos, fertility, strength, danger, death, renewal, all present in one small room. This is theology, in clay and bone, theology you can smell and touch. No written myths needed, the symbols themselves preach. It's worth pausing to consider humor again. Religion never excludes it. Picture a villager joking during a ritual feast. Careful, if you burn that goat bone the wrong way, the gods will send us sheep instead. Or children making pretend shrines out of chicken bones, giggling until scolded. Reverence is real, but laughter keeps fear manageable. Even the leopard on the wall might be the butt of a joke. That looks more like a fat cat than a killer, and yet, when firelight flickers, the laughter fades and awe returns. Over time, certain animals become associated with certain roles. Bulls with male force, goats with domestic fertility, leopards with guardianship, vultures with transition, snakes with rebirth. These associations harden, repeated in shrine after shrine, until they form a symbolic system. Later civilizations will inherit this system, elaborating it into gods with animal attributes, bull-headed storm gods, snake-bodied underworld deities, lion-bodied protectors. But the roots are here, in 500 BCE Anatolia, where animals first took their seats at the divine table. So when you think of shrines, don't imagine empty white walls. Imagine a crowded bestiary, horns jutting, leopards prowling, snakes coiling, vultures hovering, boars charging. Imagine smoke thick with the scent of roasted goat, bones cracking in fire, feathers drifting down. Imagine figurines presiding calmly amid this chaos, clay mothers unbothered by the wild assembly. That's the secret of animal cults in shrines. They don't tame the wild, they invite it in, seat it at the hearth and turn it into symbol. Step back outside into the Anatolian night. Dogs bark, goats bleat, owls hoot, snakes rustle unseen. Then step back into the shrine where all those sounds are transformed into plaster, clay, paint and bone. Inside, the world makes sense. Every animal has meaning, every danger has place, every force is acknowledged. and in that acknowledgement, humans feel less small, less vulnerable. The wild is not banished, it is reimagined. That is the genius of early shrines. They make peace with chaos by giving it a seat in the sacred room. The shrines are alive with horns, figurines, leopards, and snakes, but none of them truly come to life without the smell of smoke curling in the air and the crackle of fire licking through offerings. If there is one element that binds together ritual across early Anatolia in 500 BCE, it is fire. Fire transforms. It turns grain into bread, meat into nourishment, clay into hardness, wood into ash, and in the sacred rooms, fire is the mediator between human and divine. You cannot hand food directly to a god, but you can burn it. You cannot whisper into the soil and expect rain, but you can let smoke rise, carrying your wish upward. Step into a shrine during a ritual evening. The air is already thick, the plaster walls glowing faintly from earlier heat. A central hearth glows red. Ashes scatter across the floor, layered from dozens of earlier fires. Villagers press in close, children in the back, elders in front. A goat bone cracks in the flames. Sparks fly and the smoke curls upward, carrying the smell of fat, charred grain, and resinous wood. It's not comfortable. Your eyes sting, your throat tightens, but discomfort is part of the point. Sacred space isn't supposed to be cozy, it's supposed to alter your senses, remind you you've crossed into another kind of room. Fire is fed with more than wood. Bones from earlier feasts are tossed in, their surfaces blackened, sometimes cracked deliberately. Seeds, barley, wheat, lentils, are scattered across flames, popping faintly as they burn. Sometimes entire bowls of food are set in fire, offerings to powers unseen. The ash builds up over time, layer upon layer. Archaeologists dig through these layers centuries later and find traces of meals long gone. Animal bones, charred seeds, even the impressions of woven baskets burned in sacrifice. Each layer is a fossil of devotion, proof that shrines weren't silent galleries but smoky kitchens of ritual. It's easy to imagine the rhythm. A chant begins, low and repetitive, timed with the hiss of burning grain. Someone pours liquid, maybe water, maybe beer, into the flames, producing a burst of steam. Children cough, laugh nervously, then are hushed. The hearth itself is more than a fireplace, it's a portal. Flames are unpredictable, leaping, flickering, consuming. They transform solid into smoke, matter into memory. To stare into fire is to stare into mystery. Villagers must have seen fire as alive, hungry, responsive, even divine. Feeding it bones and grain wasn't just metaphor, it was interaction. And ashes weren't just waste, they were sacred residue, proof that offering had been accepted. Ashes were often swept, gathered, even buried carefully. In some shrines, ash layers are so thick, you can imagine entire generations of ritual compressed into a few feet of grey dust. Sometimes the offerings weren't only food, figurines too were placed in fire. Clay goddesses cracked, exploded, hardened, then were retrieved, their surfaces blackened. Were they ruined, or were they transformed, baptized in flame? Perhaps both. A figurine that survived fire unscathed might be seen as powerful, one that cracked might be buried, its energy released. Either way, fire was the judge. Fire decided what endured and what didn't, and villagers listened. One can't ignore the communal aspect. Offerings weren't private mutterings in the corner, they were group events. Families gathered, food prepared, animals butchered, some portions eaten by villagers, some offered to fire. A feast and a sacrifice, indistinguishable. Imagine the laughter between chants, the clatter of bowls, the jokes slipping between solemn words. Don't burn that bread, or the goddess will think you can't cook. Ritual wasn't sterile, it was lived, and lived religion always mixes reverence with humor, devotion with daily life. The presence of fire also shaped shrine architecture. Walls are thick to hold heat, niches are plastered smooth to catch light. Horns gleam brighter when firelight flickers across them. Red ochre pulses deeper, almost glowing. In dim light, leopards seem to move. The entire room becomes animated, theatrical. Without fire, the symbols are static. With fire, they breathe. That's why shrines aren't just places of storage, they are stages. Fire is the spotlight, transforming clay and bone into actors. What about the ashes left behind? They accumulate in corners, under floors, inside pits. Some are mixed deliberately with new plaster, embedding past rituals into walls. Others are swept into small deposits, sometimes alongside beads or figurines. Ash is both memory and medium. You can't touch smoke, but you can keep ash. Imagine villagers plastering their floors with ash mixed in, literally sealing past offerings into the foundation. Every step is then a step on burned prayers. Animal bones reveal fascinating details. Many are cut, cooked, eaten, then burned. Feasting and offering blur seamlessly. A goat leg roasted for villagers becomes an offering when its bones crackle in flames. Cattle bones, harder to acquire, may have been burned in especially important rituals. Skulls plastered into walls weren't eaten, they were displayed. The choices tell you which animals mattered most. Goats and sheep for daily survival, bulls for prestige and spectacle, birds for mystery, boars for danger. Fire digests them all. Liquids join the mix. Beer brewed from grain, fermented in jars, may have been poured into hearths. The hiss of liquid on coals, the smell of malt rising, the laughter of villagers drinking what wasn't offered. This is as close as you get to communion in 5. Liquid evaporates into smoke, just as prayers evaporate into hope. Drink with us, the offering says to gods and ancestors, and perhaps the gods, if they existed, smelled the vapor and were appeased. Seasonality plays a role. At harvest, grain offerings surge. At lambing season, sheep bones pile up. In times of drought, perhaps more figurines are burned, more pleas sent into smoke. Fire rituals mirror the agricultural calendar. Shrines aren't timeless, they pulse with cycles of sowing, reaping, birth, death. Each offering is timed to need, each ash layer is a timestamp. Dig through them, and you read not only religion but economy, ecology, and desperation. You might wonder, did villagers ever doubt? Did someone roll eyes and mutter, "We've burned half the harvest, and still no rain"? Almost certainly, but doubt doesn't stop ritual, doubt fuels it. The less sure you are, the more desperately you burn, the more fervently you offer. Skepticism and faith dance together, each keeping the other alive, and in the middle, fire eats silently, asking no questions. Humor again breaks the tension. Someone cracks a joke about the gods liking their goat too well, another warns that if you toss in bones too fast, you'll smoke everyone out. Children cough theatrically, earning laughs. Fire rituals weren't perfect, they were messy, smoky, loud, but that messiness was the point. You weren't communing with abstract concepts, you were negotiating with chaos, and nothing negotiates like fire. So imagine again the shrine on a ritual night. Fire roars, horns gleam, figurines glow, smoke fills the air, people chant, eat, laugh, cough, cry, ash settles in layers. Tomorrow the shrine will look quiet again, just plaster and niches. But tonight, it is alive, and each villager walks out carrying smoke in their lungs, ashes on their clothes, memories in their mind. That's the power of fire and offerings. They don't only rise to gods, they sink into people, into houses, into the very fabric of a village. The shrines of Anatolia in 550–500 BCE are laboratories not only of symbols but of transformation. Fire is the tool, offerings the medium, ashes the record. Together they create continuity, a rhythm of burning and remembering, feasting and fearing, laughing and praying. Without fire, shrines would be museums. With fire, they are engines, engines that consume, transform and connect humans to the forces they hope are listening. The smoke has barely cleared from the last fire when the next sound fills the room, voices, because shrines in 500 BCE Anatolia are not silent chambers, they are arenas of participation, places where people come together, not just to look at symbols or toss bones into fire, but to act, to perform, to remember. Community ritual is the glue, the choreography of repetition that binds families into villages and villages into cultures. Without it, horns are just horns and figurines are just clay. With it, they become alive. Picture the scene. Dusk is falling, shadows stretch long across the plain, and villagers begin to gather. Some carry baskets of grain, others lead a goat, others bring jars of liquid, beer, water, maybe something more fermented. They converge in the courtyard, or at the entrance to a shrine. Children squirm, excited, trying to sneak bites of food before it's time. Elders shuffle forward, leaning on sticks. The air is heavy with anticipation, a mix of solemnity and festival, because rituals are both half sacred duty, half excuse for a feast. Processions often begin outside the shrine. Villagers line up, carrying offerings, singing repetitive chants. The rhythm is simple, easy enough that everyone can join. Words invoking rain, fertility, protection. The beat of feet on packed earth becomes part of the chant. Drums may not exist yet in elaborate form, but hands slap thighs, sticks strike pots, voices find pulse. A child might bang two stones together, adding noise to rhythm. It's messy, but it works. Procession moves forward, step by step, until everyone spills into the small shrine space, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Inside, the crowd thickens. Firelight flickers, red ochre glows, horns shine. The ritual leader, not yet a priest in formal robes, but perhaps an elder or respected household head, raises arms. Silence falls, then murmurs rise again, chants weaving. A goat is led forward, perhaps tethered, perhaps stroked before being sacrificed. If not killed, then symbolically offered. Horns touched to shrine walls, breath acknowledged, life thanked. If killed, its blood may touch fire, its meat later shared. Either way, the animal is not only food tonight, it is participant. Food offerings are shared in patterns. Some portions tossed into fire, others distributed to villagers. Grain scattered across coals, bread broken into pieces, beer poured into cups. Everyone eats, everyone drinks, everyone burns. The line between sacred meal and ordinary feast blurs. In fact, that's the genius of it. By eating together, villagers strengthen social bonds. By burning part of the meal, they invite unseen forces into the bond. Ritual is not only about gods, it's about neighbors. You may grumble about someone's noisy goat, but tonight you chew the same bread. Depositions mark rituals too. Broken figurines, beads, shells, bones, all deliberately placed in pits or niches. Some are buried under floors, others tucked into wall crevices. These aren't accidents, they're records. Each deposit is a message. We were here, we acted, we offered. Think of them as signatures in clay. Centuries later, archaeologists dig them out, but at the time they function as memory anchors. The next time villagers gather, they know the pit beneath their feet holds traces of earlier rituals. Continuity is secured not by written history, but by layers of deposits. And yet, ritual isn't always grand. Sometimes it's small, a family gathering quietly, burning a handful of grain, whispering thanks. Other times it's communal, the whole village packed in, singing until smoke chokes them. Both scales matter. Intimate rituals keep belief personal, daily, woven into chores. Communal rituals remind people they belong to something larger. Shrines accommodate both. In a way, they are community centers as much as temples. The emotional range is wide. Some moments are solemn, silence as a figurine is placed, tears when an offering is made for a lost child. Others are ecstatic, singing, dancing, drinking until laughter fills the room, and in between, jokes slip in. Someone coughs exaggeratedly at the smoke, drawing laughter. A child repeats chants in a silly voice until hushed. An elder complains the goat is too small for the god's appetite. Humor doesn't diminish the ritual, it strengthens it. Shared laughter is as bonding as shared prayer. Sometimes processions extend beyond shrines. Villagers might circle fields, carrying figurines or horns, chanting for rain. They might walk to rivers, scattering ash in water. They might climb hills, leaving offerings at high points. Shrines are the heart, but ritual arteries reach outward. The entire landscape becomes sacred when walked, sung, marked. Imagine a line of villagers silhouetted against sunset, carrying a clay figurine across fields, dust rising from their feet. That's as much ritual as anything inside four walls. Over time, repetition builds tradition. The same chants used each year, the same horns plastered, the same deposits buried. Children grow up knowing when festivals occur, what foods to bring, how to chant. Ritual becomes calendar. Instead of written months, villagers count by ceremonies. The fire feast, after harvest, the offering when lambs are born, the ash renewal at planting. Shrines thus structure time. They turn chaos of seasons into rhythm of life. It's not all equal. Some families host more, give more, control more. Shrines tied to certain households gain prestige. Leaders emerge, ritual specialists, memory keepers, people who know chants better, who manage deposits more carefully. Are they priests? Not yet, but they are on the road to becoming one. Religion is power, and shrines distribute it unevenly. That inequality simmers, sometimes resented, sometimes accepted. Still, ritual continues, because even if one family holds the shrine, everyone needs the bond it provides. The rituals serve more than gods. They settle disputes, redistribute food, display generosity. If one family slaughters a goat for offering, neighbors eat. If one family deposits beads, everyone sees their wealth. Ritual is politics in smoke and fire. It's negotiation wrapped in chants, it's insurance for survival and stage for status. Villagers may not articulate this, but they feel it. When they chant together, they are not only praying, they are binding the social contract. Imagine leaving such a ritual late at night. Smoke clings to your hair, your throat still raw from chanting, your stomach full of shared food. You step into cool air, stars bright above, the shrine glows faintly behind you, neighbors laugh softly as they walk home, children drowsy, elders satisfied. You know tomorrow fields will need plowing, goats herding, quarrels resuming, but tonight for a few smoky hours, everyone was together, acting as one. That's the magic of community ritual. It doesn't erase hardship, but it makes it bearable. So when you think of Anatolian shrines in 550–500 BCE, don't imagine silent rooms of static symbols, imagine crowded gatherings, noisy chants, smoky feasts, laughter between prayers, imagine processions circling fields, ash scattered in rivers, figurines paraded across plains, imagine repetition binding people, making seasons manageable, life meaningful. Shrines are not just walls and horns, they are theaters where communities rehearse survival, again and again, until the gods, or at least the neighbors, are convinced. The smoke has cleared, the chants faded, the goat bones buried under layers of ash, but one question lingers in your mind as you step back out into the cool Anatolian night. Who was in charge of all that? Who actually led the procession, decided when to burn the grain, chose which figurines to place in the niches? Was it a priest, someone specially set apart, robed in authority, guiding the community with sacred knowledge? Or was it simply the head of a household, an elder with experience, a grandmother with memory? In 5500 BCE, the answer is far less tidy than later history would like. Ritual authority in these shrines is still experimental, shifting, communal, sometimes improvised. Look around a village, no towering temples, no palaces, no grand robes. Life is mud brick, barley, goats, smoke. In such a setting, ritual authority is not yet professionalized. There are no full-time priests, no rigid caste of sacred specialists. Instead, ritual seems to have flowed through households, led by whoever held status or trust. Sometimes this meant older men, especially those with experience hunting aurochs or managing cattle. After all, bulls and horns dominate shrine imagery. Other times it may have been older women, especially those who knew the rhythms of childbirth, fertility, and the care of figurines. Archaeologists have found houses with repeated female figurines, suggesting women played central roles in maintaining shrines. Imagine a grandmother smoothing plaster on a shrine wall, repainting a red ochre handprint, whispering words of continuity. She may never have been called a priestess, but in practice she carried ritual authority. Imagine an elder man leading chants, his voice gravelly, recounting ancestral words passed down. He too wasn't a priest, but he functioned as one. Authority in shrines wasn't vested in an office, it was vested in trust, memory, and reputation. Household leaders likely played dual roles. They managed grain storage, animal herding, dispute settlement, and they oversaw ritual. To lead a feast was to lead a ritual. To decide how food was distributed was to decide how offerings were made. There was no sharp line between economic and religious leadership. Authority blurred, just as sacred and domestic blurred inside the same walls. When villagers followed a leader into a shrine, they weren't obeying a distant priestly class. They were following the same person who might have mediated a dispute yesterday or lent them a goat last month. But not all households were equal. Some were larger, with thicker walls, more storage bins, more elaborate plastering. These families may have become ritual hubs. Their shrines contained more horns, more figurines, more deposits. Their leaders gained prestige as ritual specialists. Did they exploit this? Possibly. Ritual and politics often intertwine. To control access to shrines is to control access to legitimacy. Imagine a leader hinting that only their household knows the right chant to ensure rain. Is that manipulation? Perhaps, but if the rain came after, who would dare doubt them? Still, it's too simple to imagine shrines as monopolized by one priestly family. Evidence suggests rituals were participatory, involving many voices. Offerings were brought by multiple families. Deposits contained objects from across households. Authority was distributed, though unevenly. Think of shrines less as a pulpit controlled by one priest and more as a stage where multiple actors performed, with certain elders improvising lead roles. Women likely played a central part, particularly in rituals around fertility, childbirth, and domestic continuity. Female figurines are too abundant, too central to have been mere passive symbols. Someone handled them, placed them, prayed with them. Who better than women, who embodied the same forces? Archaeologists have found burials of women with beads and figurines, suggesting respected ritual roles. Imagine midwives leading prayers, mothers placing offerings, grandmothers overseeing seasonal replastering. If shrines were households turned sacred, then women, the heart of household labor, were also its sacred custodians. At the same time, men surely held authority in rituals involving bulls, horns, hunting and sacrifice. Killing an aurochs, dragging back its skull, plastering its horns into a shrine wall, that was male-coded work. Ritual feasts involving goat or sheep may have been led by men who managed herds. Authority likely oscillated between genders depending on ritual focus. Fertility rites leaned female, hunting rites leaned male, communal feasts mixed both. Balance, not hierarchy, may have been the unspoken rule. And what about children? Don't dismiss them. Archaeologists find tiny handprints on plaster walls, clearly from small fingers dipped in ochre. Children were included, perhaps to teach, perhaps to amuse. They may not have led rituals, but their presence mattered. Imagine a ritual leader lifting a child's hand, pressing it against plaster, leaving a mark that says, "You belong to this continuity." Even play could be sacred when the handprint sealed participation. Authority, then, was fluid, not centralized, not institutionalized, but emergent. Whoever had memory, skill, charisma, or resources could lead. Whoever had access to shrines could host. Communities recognized authority not through office, but through action. You led because you could, because people trusted you, because outcomes seemed to favor you. And if they didn't, well, maybe someone else took charge next season. Flexibility was key. Shrines were too small, too local to sustain rigid hierarchies. Authority was personal, not bureaucratic. Of course, inequality still seeped in. Families with more cattle could contribute more horns. Families with more grain could host larger feasts. Authority clustered around resources. Over generations, that clustering grew. By the late Neolithic, certain households likely became permanent ritual centers, their leaders proto-priests. But in 500 BCE the process is still fluid. Authority is testing itself, experimenting just like the shrines. Imagine one such ritual. An elder man begins the chant, his voice trembling but strong. A grandmother adds a prayer, her hands steady as she sprinkles grain into fire. Children echo, clapping along. A goat is tethered, stroked, then killed, its bones cracking in flames. And yet, some roles clearly mattered more: the one who knew the chants, the one who remembered when to replaster, the one who kept figurines safe between ceremonies. These were proto-priests, though the community may not have named them so. They carried memory, and memory is power. Without them, rituals falter. With them, rituals repeat. Continuity thrives. That's authority, not in titles but in knowledge. Humor again softens the scene. Imagine someone muttering, "If the elder forgets the words again, we'll never get rain," or a grandmother teasing, "You painted the leopard crooked, no wonder the goats keep escaping." Authority never goes unquestioned. Jokes remind leaders they're still part of the group, not above it, and in laughter, ritual stays human. So when you picture shrines in 550–500 BCE Anatolia, don't imagine solemn priests in robes or kings commanding sacrifices. Imagine households, elders, grandmothers, hunters, midwives, children. Imagine rituals led by whoever had voice, memory, or resources. Authority distributed but uneven, fluid but real. Shrines were not only sacred rooms, they were classrooms where authority was rehearsed, improvised, and slowly shaped into the priesthoods that would dominate later millennia. In these mud brick rooms, with horns on walls and fire in hearths, you witness the first experiments in religious leadership. Not yet priests, but proto-priests. Not yet temples, but proto-temples. Authority, like clay, is still being molded, and each chant, each offering, each laugh in smoke, helps harden the form. By now you've walked through smoky shrines, stood over burials beneath floors, watched elders lead chants, and seen figurines cracked in flames. But Anatolia, in 500 BCE, is not an island. Villages do not exist in a vacuum, each one inventing its own rituals in isolation. Ideas, objects, and styles flow across the region, carried by trade, migration, and rumor. To really understand the shrines, you need to place them alongside their cousins in other Anatolian sites, Çatalhöyük, Haciler, Kan Hasan and more. Regional comparisons reveal both striking continuities and fascinating divergences, proof that early religion was not uniform, but a patchwork of shared themes and local experiments. Let's start with Çatalhöyük. By 500 BCE, its heyday was already past, but its legacy lingered. Çatalhöyük was massive for its time. Thousands of people, houses crammed together, shrines embedded within domestic walls, bulls' horns plastered into niches, leopards painted in relief, female figurines buried under floors. All of it had already appeared here, centuries earlier. Walk into a house at Çatalhöyük, and you'd see walls crowded with symbols, horns, hands, hunting scenes, vultures, hovering over headless bodies, fireplaces thick with ash, burials layered beneath plaster, figurines tucked into bins. Sound familiar? It should. Many of the same practices carried into later Anatolian villages. But Çatalhöyük was different in scale. It was dense, urban-like, a labyrinth of rooftops and ladders. Shrines were everywhere, not rare. Almost every cluster of houses had one. Religion there was pervasive, unavoidable, woven into the very architecture of the city. By 5500 BCE, however, settlements were smaller, more spread out. Shrines were fewer, more selective, more concentrated in certain households. The shift from Çatalhöyük to later sites shows a transition, religion moving from universal, domestic practice to more centralized, household-based authority. In other words, shrines narrowed, fewer rooms, but perhaps more specialized. Then move to Kan Hasan, another Anatolian site. Here architecture is more compartmentalized. Shrines are modest, but still distinct, decorated walls, plastered niches, deposits of bones. What stands out at Kan Hasan is continuity. Even as settlements changed, shrines retained familiar features, horns, figurines, ash layers. The repertoire remained recognizable, even as villages shrank or shifted. Religion proved conservative. Once a symbol worked, a horn, a figurine, a red-painted wall, it was repeated, replastered, replicated. Continuity mattered more than innovation. Shrines were not laboratories of wild invention everywhere, often they were archives of tradition. Compare also to sites in the Levant, just south. Jericho, for example, earlier had plastered skulls, human heads exhumed, faces reshaped with plaster, eyes inlaid with shells. That practice echoes faintly in Anatolia's burials. At Çatalhöyük and later sites, skulls were sometimes removed, perhaps displayed, then reburied. It's not identical, but it rhymes. The idea that ancestors' heads held special power was widespread. Shrines across the Near East echoed one another, even if details differed. Ideas traveled faster than armies, carried by traders, migrants, marriages. Mesopotamia too was stirring. By 500 BCE in the Ubaid period, southern Mesopotamian villages were developing temples, small but communal, set apart, not embedded in houses. Compare that to Anatolia, where shrines still nestled inside domestic spaces. Already a divergence. Mesopotamia moving toward communal temples, Anatolia keeping religion household-centered. Later, temples would dominate the ancient world, but Anatolia's shrines remind us that other models existed, small, intimate, woven into family life. Even within Anatolia, differences abounded. Some villages emphasized bulls, plastering horn after horn. Others emphasized figurines, crafting endless variations of seated women. Some deposited animal bones, others beads, others obsidian. This patchwork is crucial. There was no single Neolithic religion. There were family resemblances, shared motifs, overlapping practices, but each community adjusted according to environment, economy, and memory. Shrines were flexible enough to allow this diversity. Think about architecture too. At Çatalhöyük, shrines and houses are indistinguishable from the outside. No monumental facades, no towering altars. At Haciler, some shrines stand out more, with careful decoration and placement. At later sites, shrines become rarer, suggesting increasing specialization. Compare that to Mesopotamia, where temples grew larger, dominating settlement layouts. Anatolia went one way, Mesopotamia another. These comparisons show choices. Religion was not an inevitable march toward temples. Shrines could remain small, intimate, household-based, and for centuries they did. The figurines themselves travel. Styles shift slightly from site to site, but the theme persists. Seated women, rounded bodies, painted red, some show local flair, jewelry here, feline armrests there, painted patterns elsewhere, but the core idea of female abundance repeats. This suggests shared cultural memory, a symbolic language spanning regions. A traveler from Çatalhöyük to Hacılar would recognize the figurines, even if details differed. Shared fertility iconography bound communities across distances. Trade routes reinforced this. Obsidian from central Anatolia traveled hundreds of miles, carried in exchange networks. Along with obsidian went ideas. A trader carrying shiny blades might also describe a shrine they'd seen, a figurine style, a ritual chant. Villages listened, borrowed, adapted. Shrines thus functioned not only as religious spaces but as cultural nodes, absorbing and reinterpreting influences. Regional comparisons highlight one more thing: resilience. As some villages collapsed, others thrived. As environments shifted, shrines adapted. The same horns, figurines, ash layers appear again and again. Even as settlements changed, religion anchored continuity amid upheaval. Villages may have moved, houses rebuilt, but shrines retained familiar grammar. That continuity gave comfort. No matter where you were in Anatolia, you knew what horns on a wall meant, what red painted figurines signified, what ash beneath a floor remembered. Humor crosses regions too. Imagine a trader teasing, "At Hacılar they make their goddesses fatter than yours," or a villager scoffing, "At Çatalhöyük they have so many horns they must trip over them." Even mockery reinforced shared language. To joke about shrines elsewhere is to acknowledge connection. So when you compare shrines across Anatolia and beyond, you see both sameness and difference. Bulls, figurines, ash, burials, the common grammar, but each site speaks the grammar with its own accent. Stand back and see the map. Villages scattered across Anatolia, each with shrines glowing faintly at night. South, Levantine skull cults hum. East, Mesopotamian temples rise. West, pottery cultures bloom. All connected, all experimenting, all negotiating the same questions: how to remember the dead, how to secure fertility, how to face danger, how to speak to forces unseen. Shrines are Anatolia's answer, modest, smoky, intimate, and in comparison, they stand out not for grandeur, but for humanity. Step back from Anatolia for a moment and follow the paths traders and travelers take across the wider Near East. It's 500 BCE, and while your village shrines glow red in the firelight, beyond the mountains and plains other communities are conducting their own experiments with sacred space. The first gods are not born in isolation, they are shaped by conversations, sometimes literal exchanges along trade routes, sometimes silent borrowings of imagery and practice. To understand Anatolian shrines you must set them alongside Mesopotamian temples, Levantine skull cults, and the scattered rituals of the wider Near East. Only then do you see how Anatolia both absorbed and contributed to the sacred ferment of its age. Picture a caravan moving across the landscape, men and women trudging with baskets, donkeys laden with obsidian beads, grain, salt and bitumen. Every stop along the way is an opportunity for exchange, not only goods, but stories. In the south, someone says they bury their dead with painted skulls. Far east, they've built a hall with a raised platform for offerings. These tales travel as fast as obsidian blades. By the time the caravan reaches your village, you're not only richer in goods, but richer in imagination. What does this tell you about the trajectory of religion? That separation of sacred from domestic is a turning point. It allows religion to become institutional, not just familial. Priests emerge as a class, temples as power centers, offerings as communal rather than household-based. Anatolia, however, resists this trend for a time. Its shrines remain intimate, woven into family houses. Religion here is still personal, still tied to kin, still under the roof where you sleep. The comparison underscores Anatolia's uniqueness. It shows that the future wasn't inevitable. The great temples of Uruk and Ur would come, but shrines like those in Anatolia remind us that alternative models persisted, valuing closeness over spectacle. Now look west to the Levant, at Jericho and other sites. Earlier burials revealed plastered skulls, human heads exhumed, faces remade in plaster, shells set in as eyes. These were not decorations, they were ancestors brought back into presence, displayed in houses, perhaps in rituals. The practice echoes in Anatolia, where skulls sometimes vanish from burials, only to reappear plastered or painted. The Levant skull cult may have inspired Anatolian practices, or perhaps both drew from older shared traditions. Either way, the conversation is visible. The dead do not rest quietly, they are summoned into shrines, their faces staring at the living. Anatolian shrines rarely go to the same extreme as Jericho's plastered heads, but the echo is undeniable. The ancestor's face is too powerful to ignore. North and east, in the Zagros Mountains, communities bury their dead in caves, offering beads and food. Their shrines are smaller, often little more than niches or hearths. But the themes rhyme: fertility figurines, animal bones, ash deposits. Trade goods themselves reinforce the web. Obsidian from Anatolia turns up in the Levant and Mesopotamia. Seashells from the Mediterranean arrive in inland villages. Painted pottery styles spread outward, with Anatolian motifs influencing others. These objects travel with meaning attached. A shell is not just decoration, it is a memory of the sea. Place it in a shrine, and you bring distant waters into your local cosmos. Obsidian is not just sharp stone, it is volcanic fire captured, traveling hundreds of miles. Place it in a shrine, and you harness distant mountain power. Every traded object is a portable shrine, a fragment of foreign sacredness inserted into local ritual. Let's imagine a meeting of villagers and travelers. The trader unpacks beads of lapis from far to the east. The villagers gasp, a color like the night sky, unlike anything local. They buy some, and next week the beads appear in a shrine, laid beside bull horns. Do they know the exact origin? Perhaps not, but they know it's exotic, powerful, rare. The bead's journey adds weight to the offering. The gods, they may think, will like this, it came from far away. Trade expands ritual vocabulary, giving shrines new accents. The flow isn't one way. Anatolia influences others too. Its obsidian blades are prized in Mesopotamia, its figurine style spread, perhaps inspiring echoes in Levantine fertility cults. Its bull symbolism migrates outward, feeding into later storm god traditions. Anatolia is not a passive receiver, it is an active contributor to the conversation. When later Hittite gods roar from mountain shrines, their ancestry runs back to these Neolithic bulls. When Mesopotamian temples sacrifice cattle, they echo Anatolia's plastered horns. When fertility goddesses of the Bronze Age sit enthroned, they inherit the clay women of Anatolia. The comparison also highlights timing. Anatolia clings to household shrines long after Mesopotamia builds temples. Why? Perhaps geography. Anatolia is mountainous, fragmented, dotted with small plains. Villages are smaller, more scattered. No need for massive communal temples when each household has its shrine. Mesopotamia's flat alluvial plain, by contrast, demands irrigation and large-scale cooperation. Temples become organizing hubs. Geography shapes religion. Again, the same seeds, horns, figurines, burials, sprout differently in different soils. Another striking contrast, Mesopotamian temples begin to produce gods with names, identities, mythologies. In Anatolia, by 500 BCE, gods are still symbols: bulls, women, leopards. Not yet named, not yet personified. This may be the greatest divergence. Mesopotamia moves toward theology. Anatolia remains symbolic. Which is more powerful? Hard to say. Symbols are flexible, open-ended, shared by all. Named gods become characters, with stories, but also with exclusivity. Anatolia's shrines show us religion before narrative, a world where gods are still clay, still horns, still fire. And yet, Anatolia's influence lingers long. The Hittites, millennia later, would blend Mesopotamian gods with their own mountain and fertility cults, rooted in these Neolithic shrines. The great mother goddess, later called Cybele, emerges from Anatolia's figurines. The bull, once plastered into house walls, becomes the bull of storm gods. The leopard prowling plaster walls becomes lions guarding goddess thrones. Anatolia, by staying symbolic longer, preserves a raw memory of the first gods, one later civilizations polish into names. Let's pause to imagine how villagers perceived outsiders' rituals. A trader from the south tells you of a great hall where everyone offers together. You scoff. Why would you leave your house to worship? Isn't your grandmother buried under your floor? Another tells of plastering skulls and shell eyes. You laugh nervously. We bury our dead. We don't make them stare at us. But secretly, you're intrigued. Maybe next time you'll paint a skull before reburial. Conversations spread innovation slowly, through curiosity and skepticism. Humor threads through even these exchanges. Villagers might tease a trader, your gods must be greedy if they need a whole house, or why give your dead shells for eyes? Can't they see well enough already? Sarcasm masks fascination, and sometimes jokes become rituals themselves, repeated until serious. That's how religion evolves, through banter as much as through solemnity. So what do regional comparisons teach you? That shrines are not solitary experiments. They are nodes in a network. Each village invents, borrows, adapts, repeats. Mesopotamia moves toward temples. Anatolia keeps shrines domestic. The Levant plays with skulls. Anatolia with horns. The Zagros buries in caves. Anatolia under floors. Yet all share themes: fertility, ancestors, animals, fire. All wrestle with the same anxieties: crops, childbirth, death, storms. The gods are born not in one place but in many, through a chorus of symbols echoing across landscapes. Stand back, and you see the map again. Villages in Anatolia glowing with firelight, skulls staring from Levantine houses, temples rising in Mesopotamia, caves echoing in Zagros. All experimenting, all asking the same questions. And in the middle, Anatolia's shrines stand out for their intimacy. They remind you that before temples and priests, before named gods and myths, religion was small, smoky, domestic: a grandmother repainting plaster, a child pressing a red handprint, a hunter plastering horns, a family eating beside fire. These are the roots, humble but enduring. And as caravans pass, as ideas mingle, Anatolia's shrines feed into the wider stream. Their symbols will not vanish. They will flow forward, absorbed into great temples, renamed in mythologies, polished into theology. But here in 500 BCE they are still raw, still local, still human. By now you've stood in smoky rooms, watched figurines crack in fire, felt bulls' horns loom over you, and compared Anatolia's shrines with Mesopotamia's temples and Levantine skull cults. But nothing in early religion stands still. Over centuries, shrines themselves transform. What begins as simple niches in mud brick homes evolves, shifts, sometimes shrinks, sometimes expands. To track these changes is to see the story of religion unfolding, one plaster layer at a time. In 550–500 BCE you are already at a tipping point. Anatolia's shrines are not yet temples, but they are no longer just ordinary rooms. They are changing, reshaping to meet new pressures, new social dynamics, new imaginations of the divine. Start with scale. In the earliest phases, shrines were almost indistinguishable from houses. The only clues: horns embedded in walls, painted leopards, figurines tucked in niches. You could walk into a room, think it was a bedroom, and then suddenly notice the skull staring at you from plaster. Sacred and domestic blurred completely. But by 500 BCE a shift begins. Shrines become fewer, but more elaborate. Not every house has one anymore. Instead, particular households maintain them. Sacredness concentrates. Where once almost every family plastered horns, now only some do. This narrowing suggests religion is becoming specialized. The community still participates, but through fewer spaces. Authority crystallizes around select shrines, and those shrines begin to stand out more clearly. Architecture reflects this. Some shrines gain thicker walls, sturdier plaster, carefully renewed paint. They are maintained with care across generations, even as houses crumble around them. Floors are replastered again and again, each burial beneath sealed and resealed, each deposit carefully placed. Other shrines are abandoned, their horns discarded, their figurines broken and buried. It's as if communities are consolidating sacred effort, investing more in fewer rooms. The sacred map of a village becomes more focused, less scattered. Inside shrines, symbols also evolve. Bulls remain, but their horns are now fewer in number, placed more deliberately. Leopards appear less often. Instead, fertility figurines and geometric motifs grow in prominence. The imagery narrows toward essentials: fertility, continuity, cycles. Perhaps the danger of aurochs mattered less once cattle herding became more routine. Perhaps predators like leopards became rarer, their symbolic power fading. Shrines adapt to environment. As threats shift, so do sacred images. You see here the pragmatic flexibility of religion. Gods and symbols are not static. They change with the needs of those who worship them. The role of fire changes too. In earlier shrines, ash layers built chaotically, offerings tossed in, feasts blurring with rituals. By 500 BCE, some shrines show more deliberate ash deposits, contained in pits, buried under floors, mixed into plaster. Fire becomes more controlled, offerings more structured. Ritual is moving from improvisation to choreography. Instead of everyone tossing bones haphazardly, offerings follow more formal patterns. Deposits are curated, not random. Sacredness is being standardized. The shift from many shrines to fewer, more elaborate ones also alters community dynamics. When every house had a shrine, ritual authority was diffuse, everyone had access, everyone participated at home, but when shrines concentrate in certain households, power shifts. Those families become custodians of memory, hosts of ritual, they gain prestige. Villagers may still join, but they join on terms set by others. This transformation is subtle but profound. Religion is edging toward hierarchy, toward specialization, toward the possibility of priests. Imagine a village where only 1 or 2 houses maintain shrines. The whole community gathers there for feasts, chants, offerings. The households with shrines gain influence. Others depend on them for ritual continuity. Authority hardens. Symbols themselves evolve further. Female figurines shift from broad, exaggerated forms to more stylized ones. Some are less overtly fertile, more abstract, perhaps representing not just women but goddesses. Horns become less about literal animals, and more about symbolic power. Spirals and zigzags proliferate, abstracting cycles of life into geometry. Gods are beginning to move from raw images of nature toward abstraction. The first steps toward theology are visible in clay and plaster. Burial practices shift too. Earlier, almost every house had burials beneath floors. By 5500 BCE, some settlements reduce this. Burials concentrate under certain houses, often those with shrines. Ancestors too become concentrated, not evenly spread. This reinforces hierarchy. Families with shrines also keep bones of ancestors, deepening their claim to sacred authority. Ordinary families lose direct contact, relying on ritual specialists to mediate with both gods and ancestors. The balance tips further toward inequality. Why these changes? Partly environment. As farming intensifies, villages grow more stable, mobility decreases, the need for communal feasts increases, binding people who share fields and water. Shrines adapt, becoming more communal, less private. Partly social. Inequalities emerge, and religion reflects them. Sacredness gravitates toward powerful families, legitimizing their status, and partly imagination. As generations repeat rituals, symbols accumulate weight, becoming more abstract, less literal. Bulls shift from beasts to metaphors, figurines from mothers to goddesses, spirals from doodles to eternity. This evolution also reflects broader, regional currents. In Mesopotamia, temples grow larger, separating sacred from domestic. In Anatolia, shrines remain inside houses but concentrate into fewer households. Both trends move toward specialization, but through different paths. Anatolia retains intimacy, Mesopotamia builds grandeur, yet both show the same underlying shift, religion becoming less universal, more focused, more controlled. Humor, of course, doesn't vanish. Villagers still joke about rituals. When one family's shrine gains more horns, neighbors mutter, maybe their gods are hungrier. When an elder forgets a chant, someone quips, no wonder the goats keep escaping. But beneath the jokes, the transformation is felt. Shrines are no longer everyone's domain, they belong more and more to a few. Jokes mask unease at growing hierarchy. Imagine now a shrine in 500 BCE, maintained by one household. The plaster is smooth, freshly renewed, horns gleam, fewer but deliberate. Figurines sit carefully arranged in niches, ash is buried in neat pits, firelight glows steady, not chaotic. Rituals unfold with more order, led by specific elders, with others following. The crowd presses in, participating, but less freely than before. Sacredness feels more controlled, more curated. You sense the difference. The shrine is still intimate, but no longer spontaneous. The gods are still clay and horn, but they are also beginning to take shape as concepts, as forces with rules. This transformation sets the stage for what comes next. From shrines will grow temples, from elders will grow priests, from figurines will grow goddesses with names, from horns will grow storm gods on thrones. But here in 5500 BCE Anatolia, you catch the gods mid-creation. Shrines are shifting from household corners to communal centers, from chaos to choreography, from symbols to abstraction. Religion is still young, still pliable, still being molded. And that is the beauty of this moment. You are standing at the hinge, the point where shrines are neither simple nor monumental, neither fully domestic nor fully communal, neither purely symbolic nor fully theological. They are in between, transitional, Experiment. To watch them evolve is to watch the birth of hierarchy, abstraction, and authority. To smell the smoke is to smell change itself. So when you picture shrines of 5500 BCE, don't imagine frozen relics. Imagine rooms in motion, horns being replastered, figurines reshaped, chants standardized, burials concentrated, authority narrowing. Imagine gods, still raw, still being invented, still finding form in plaster and clay, because the transformation of shrines is not background, it is the story, it is the moment when humans stop merely honoring forces and begin to organize them, name them, institutionalize them. The gods are coming into focus, and shrines are their lens. You've seen shrines narrowing into fewer households, fire rituals growing more ordered, figurines abstracting from mothers into symbols, and burials concentrating beneath particular floors. All of this points toward one thing: the gods themselves are changing. Start with the bull. At first, horns embedded in walls were trophies, physical reminders of dangerous hunts or valuable cattle. They embodied raw power, meat, fertility of herds. But repetition reshapes meaning. Place horns in plaster year after year, paint them red, set them in shrines, and soon they are more than animals. They are presences. You no longer see just a bull skull, you see strength itself, force itself, watching over you. In later centuries, this presence will gain names: Tahuna, the storm god of the Hittites; Baal, the bull-horned god of Canaan. But in 500 BCE Anatolia, the gods of storm and strength are still horns on a wall, anonymous, but already more than natural. Now consider the seated woman. At first, she was fertility incarnate, a clay belly swelling with life, a promise of safe childbirth, a metaphor for full grain bins. But repeat her enough, place her in niches, burn her in fire, bury her in floors, and she begins to transcend her immediate meaning. She becomes more than one woman, more than one womb. She becomes the mother, the earth, the source. Eventually she will become Cybele, the great mother of Anatolia, worshipped for millennia, enthroned with lions by her side. But in 500 BCE she is still clay, still fragile, still local, yet in her wide hips and calm face, the shape of the goddess is already emerging. The leopard too stretches into divinity, painted on walls, molded in relief, paired with the seated woman. The predator moves from beast to guardian, its stealth becomes protection, its ferocity becomes sacred feral power. Later, lions will flank Cybele's throne, storm gods will stand on mountain lions, the big cat becomes divine companion. In 500 BCE villagers see it first as danger, then as symbol, then as presence. Each repetition nudges it closer to the realm of gods. Geometric motifs help too. Spirals, zigzags, chevrons, handprints. At first they echo water, snakes, cycles, but as they repeat, they abstract. A spiral becomes eternity, a zigzag becomes divine force. Abstraction is crucial. It allows gods to move beyond specific animals and ancestors into universal powers. A storm god is no longer just that bull we hunted. He is the spiral of thunder, the zigzag of lightning. A mother goddess is no longer just that figurine we molded. She is the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In geometry, the gods take conceptual shape. What about ancestors? Buried under floors, their skulls sometimes removed, their bones painted, their presence remembered in shrines. At first, they are family, kin remembered individually, but as generations accumulate, as bones pile, memory blurs, ancestors merge into a collective presence. You no longer recall one grandmother, you sense the ancestors, and from there it's a short leap to deities. Ancestors become gods, stretched across time. When you pour beer into fire, are you feeding your grandfather or a storm god? By 500 BCE the line is blurring. The gods are ancestors extended to infinity. The environment feeds into this. Rivers flood and dry, storms roll over mountains, seasons cycle. Villagers cannot control these forces, but they can symbolize them: bulls for storms, figurines for fertility, leopards for danger, spirals for cycles. The more they repeat, the more the symbols detach from literal reference. The bull is not just a bull, the spiral is not just water, they become shorthand for powers unseen. Gods are born from metaphor repeated until it feels real. Let's imagine a ritual. Villagers gather in a shrine, a goat is offered, its bones tossed into fire, a figurine is placed in a niche, horns gleam above, red spirals painted on walls, smoke curls upward, chants rise. At first, you think they're thanking the goat, the figurine, the horns. But listen closer, the chants grow abstract, words about rain, fertility, cycles. They aren't speaking to a goat or a figurine anymore. They're speaking to something larger, unseen, unnameable but powerful. The first gods are being addressed, even if no one yet knows their names. This transformation is gradual, almost invisible. Villagers themselves might not realize it. Ask them who they worship, and they might point to the horns, the figurine, the leopard, but in their minds, those objects already point beyond themselves. The bull is storm, the figurine is earth, the leopard is ferocity. They are no longer just symbols, they are presences, and presences, when repeated, become gods. Humor lingers, even here. Someone might joke, if the goddess really sat in that chair it would break under her hips. Or, these horns look tired, maybe the god needs new ones. But jokes don't erase belief, they humanize it, make it livable. Even in laughter, villagers repeat the rituals, repaint the symbols, feed the fire. The gods don't mind jokes. In fact, jokes may make them feel closer, more familiar, less terrifying. It's tempting to imagine that gods arrive fully formed, with names, myths, temples, but 5500 BCE Anatolia shows otherwise. Gods begin as fragments, as clay lumps, as plaster horns, as painted spirals. They are gestures, repeated until they solidify. They are anxieties, embodied until they become presences. They are metaphors, stretched until they become beings. In these shrines, you see gods before theology, before priests, before scripture. You see them raw, experimental, still half human, half symbol. The first gods are plural, diffuse, overlapping. The bull, the mother, the leopard, the spiral, the ancestors. There is no single pantheon yet, no neat hierarchy. Instead, there is a swarm of presences, each tied to specific needs: rain, birth, protection, continuity. Over time, some will rise, others fade. The mother will endure, becoming Cybele, then Rhea, then Magna Mater. The bull will become storm gods across the Near East. The leopard will merge into lions, divine companions. The spiral will become eternity symbols. The ancestors will become household gods, then underworld deities. But here, in 5500 BCE, they are all equals, sharing smoky rooms, competing for attention. The transformation also marks a shift in human imagination. Animals and ancestors are immediate, tangible. Gods are abstract, distant, conceptual. To invent gods is to step into a new mental world, one where humans can conceive of forces not tied to visible objects, but existing in themselves. This leap is enormous. It is the leap from symbol to theology, from ritual to religion. The shrines of Anatolia are the laboratories where this leap happens, quietly, over centuries of plaster and ash. Step into one such shrine at night. Fire glows, horns gleam, figurines sit silently, spirals pulse on walls, villagers chant, offerings burn, children watch. You sense presences in the smoke, more than horn or clay. The gods are not fully formed, not named, not written, but they are here hovering, taking shape in repetition. You are watching the first gods being born, not in myths, but in mud brick rooms. That is the secret of 500 BCE, Anatolia. The gods are not yet Zeus or Ishtar, not yet enthroned or narrated. They are still clay and horn, fire and ash. But in the very act of repetition, of layering plaster, of burning offerings, of chanting cycles, villagers stretch symbols into divinity, and without realizing it, they create gods who will endure for millennia. By now you've followed the horns into plaster, the figurines into niches, the fire into smoke, and the ancestors into floors. You've watched shrines narrow from many to few, rituals become more ordered, symbols stretch into gods. All along you've been standing in Anatolia around 550–500 BCE, watching the slow birth of religion. But the story doesn't end there. These shrines, modest and smoky as they are, leave a legacy. Their echoes carry forward into Bronze Age temples, Iron Age pantheons, and the first great civilizations. To close our journey, we need to follow the thread, how Anatolia's sacred spaces, humble and intimate, shape the future of gods. And then, as the embers fade, let yourself rest. The first legacy is continuity. Anatolia never abandoned its mother figurines. The seated clay woman of 550 AE becomes, thousands of years later, the great mother Cybele. By then she is carved in stone, enthroned, lions at her side, worshipped in processions and festivals across the ancient Mediterranean. But her roots are here, in mud brick shrines, in clay bellies, painted red. When Romans carried her cult to the city of Rome itself, they were unknowingly venerating the imagination of Neolithic Anatolia. Every figurine cracked in a shrine, every belly molded by hand, was a step toward Cybele's throne. The bull too endures. From horns plastered in Anatolian walls comes the storm god of the Hittites, Tahuna, who rides bulls across thunderclouds. From there the image spreads to Baal of Canaan, Zeus of Greece, Jupiter of Rome, all those gods with bulls at their side, lightning in their hands, storm in their voices. They trace back to aurochs' skulls, plastered into walls, to villagers staring at horns glowing in firelight. The storm god begins as a beast of the plain, tamed into symbol, repeated until divine. The leopard, too, shifts into lions. The plaster reliefs of sleek cats on Neolithic walls re-emerge in Bronze Age goddess thrones, where lions crouch as guardians. The predator becomes companion of the divine, ferocity turned into protection. Every lion carved on a goddess's throne remembers, dimly, the painted leopards of Anatolian shrines. Even the ancestor cults persist. The practice of burying beneath floors may fade, but the idea that the dead remain present lingers. Household gods, ancestors worshipped in Mesopotamia, Greek heroes honored at tombs, all of these are heirs of Anatolian burials. The sense that the dead linger, watching, guiding, judging, begins under mud brick floors with children playing above grandmother's bones. That intimacy with the dead never truly leaves human religion. And beyond specifics, the greatest legacy is habit, the habit of repetition, layering plaster upon plaster, repainting symbols, depositing offerings, burning bones, chanting cycles. Ritual repetition is religion's heartbeat. Once begun, it never stops. Later civilizations will build myths to explain rituals, priests to guard them, scriptures to codify them, but the rituals come first, and they come from places like Anatolia's shrines, where villagers repeated acts, season after season, until they became unbreakable. Pause here and imagine time flowing forward. Centuries roll by, villages rise and fall, shrines crumble, horns decay, figurines crack, but others are rebuilt, reformed, remade. By the Bronze Age, Anatolia is filled with larger settlements, palaces, temples. By the Iron Age, kingdoms rise, gods take names, priests wear robes. By classical times, myths sing of Zeus and Cybele, temples rise in marble, processions fill streets, and in every chant, every offering, every symbol, faint echoes of 500 BCE linger. The gods of the future are haunted by the shrines of the past. Now step back into one final Anatolian night. It is 500 BCE again. The village is quiet. Fires smolder low. Dogs bark at shadows. Inside one house, a shrine glows faintly. Horns protrude from plaster. A figurine sits silently in a niche. Ashes rest in layers under floor. A grandmother smooths plaster one last time before bed, muttering words half remembered from her own grandmother. A child watches, yawning, eyes wide, pressing a red handprint onto the wall. Outside, stars glitter, indifferent, eternal. But inside that room, humans are inventing gods, one handprint at a time. And as you stand there, smoke in your lungs, ochre on your hands, you realize the magnitude. You are witnessing the birth of a human habit that will never end. People will always build shrines, always burn offerings, always mold gods from clay and imagination.